Welcome to the Cooperative Program stage at the 2023 SBC Annual Meeting. This is the second of three panels with IMB personnel, and today we are going to be talking about our Church Connections program and some stories from the field. So joining me on stage, we have John Brady, VP for Global Engagement, Jeff and Jennifer Buxton, IMB Missionaries to European Peoples, and currently Affinity Stateside Associates, and Chris Derry, IMB Director of Church and Campus Engagement. My name is Ed Herrelko, and I'm the IMB's VP of Marketing and Communications, and I will be moderating this session. So John, our first question's for you. You're responsible for the global engagement work of nearly 3,500 Southern Baptist missionaries around the world. So you're always in the know of how God's at work. Can you give us a glimpse of what God's doing out there?
Well, you know, this is one of the most exciting times in really salvation history to live. God's got people on the move in all sorts of different places. And when you start thinking about missions, you have to start having that global connect where God has got missionaries in all sorts of places. Because in recent days, just last week, I'm talking to a whole group that are in the heart of Asia. They're in a very tough location. And 3 times during 3 different people I'm talking to, they said, one of the refugees was touched by this person and they sent a connection to us. And I went to a guy's house. We're sitting there. He's looks like a devout Muslim in this very, very Islamic place. And he says, I've got a book. And he goes over and he reaches up to the top shelf and he pulls down a book. And he said, could you help me with it? And it's the Bible. And our worker who's right there, because of that connection, opens that book up and they're looking in the Old Testament and they're reading about Moses. And then they turn and they look to see Jesus. And in that moment, there was a connection that was made from God's word to that man's heart. You see, when you have a chain of events that happen where God stirs one missionary who is a church member actually in another place to reach out to a refugee, that in turn turns around and goes down the line and sends to a person in the absolute darkest and hardest place in the world. The gospel moves people from perishing to life everlasting. Nothing like that could ever happen in another time in history.
Thank you for sharing that. And Jennifer, as an IMB missionary among European peoples, you're aiming to do what John just described: build relationships, share the gospel, look for open doors, and to also give Southern Baptists ongoing contact with God's work around the world, and let us know how the CP efforts and resources help that. So tell us how our cooperative program gifts are making a difference in fulfilling the Great Commission.
Well, before 2021, our leadership realized that almost 50% of churches had not been in contact with an IMB missionary. And we realized this is a problem. So immediately, our missionaries started writing, emailing, calling churches. And because we realize with the world's greatest problem of lostness, we have to do this together. We have to share the stories, like what John said, with the churches, because it's with the churches that help us go, pray, send, and give. And for that, we're thankful. So they started writing thank you to the churches. And as an ASA, I am on a special assignment right now, which helps coach the field missionaries and the SBC churches on connecting better, communicating and reaching each other so that we can solve the world's greatest problem of lostness.
So as part of the Church Connections effort, we are actively trying to reach out to churches all throughout the country. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yes. Since June 1st, we have written over 40,000 churches via emails, through letters, and through postcards. And we have had calls, and we've done different ways of reaching. We have some people have gone to events, but we're trying to connect with all the churches in SBC.
Excellent. And Chris, in your work helping to mobilize churches, you were on a panel earlier. We talked about getting churches to be sending churches, to have them go. You see firsthand the difference it makes for a church to be directly connected, not just to the IMB home office, but to missionaries on the field. So tell me a little bit more about what they're missing out on if they're not connected to one of our missionaries.
The greatest work in the universe, Ed. Like plus working alongside some of their own. I mean, these are Southern Baptist missionaries that, through the cooperative program and Lottie Christmas offering, have, they have their lives and ministry sustained by the work of our 47,000 churches. You're missing out on a great chance for togetherness for the gospel and seeing people like in John's story that don't know somebody who knows Jesus actually have a chance to hear the gospel of Jesus. So one of the things that we know anecdotally is relationships matter when it comes to teamwork. And I mentioned this earlier, that the Great Commission, I believe, runs on the rails of relationships. We see this in 3 John is a great testimony to this. John's commending Gaius for how his church is being so hospitable to those who have gone out for the sake of the name, even though they were strangers to them. This is a great work. He's commending them for this work. Relationships matter, right? And for those that are the sent ones that are going out for this work, it's hard work, and that constant level of need for encouragement is so vital. The churches have a vital role in that, but they can also help them to expand that work that's happening in the places where those that have gone out are living and working for the sake of the gospel. So I know this. So relationships matter, but the data says this too. When we worked with Barna a couple of years ago on producing a book looking at the next generation, one of the things that Barna identified in that research was when the next generation has a relationship with a real missionary, that their prayer life increases dramatically for that person, right? So I forgot the actual statistic. I think it was something around the average number of times they would pray for that person is around 4 more times that week that they would pray. Their likelihood to go and be a missionary was 4 times as likely, and their giving increases 400%. So the statistics tell us what we already know, just anecdotally. Relationships matter. I know that if the other person on the other side of my prayers and my giving and my going, if I know their life and their work and their ministry, I'm going to be that much more committed to that. So let's, as now a convention of churches who are desiring to see the Great Commission fulfilled, if I'm a pastor and I'm working with a pastor, I want him to say, this is your best opportunity to join your entire fellowship, all of their giftings, all the ages, all those who are following Christ in your fellowship, into the greatest work in the universe, working with Baptist missionaries, like-mindedness, and how we want to see healthy churches planted among the nations. Why would you say no to that? What a great opportunity.
Well, it's really interesting as we've talked about relationships, and that's, ministry is inherently relational. God created us to be relational. And one of the biggest benefits of the IMB is that our missionaries don't have to worry about funding. They don't have to worry about being faith funded. There's a downside to that historically, that they don't have to come back and visit with churches as frequently. And that's what spurred on this whole church connections thing. And, Jeff, serving on the field, you see the other side of what Chris described. You see missionaries who sometimes can feel disconnected. They're so plugged into their local context. They're doing exactly what they feel God's called them to do, but they don't have that connection back with a large body or a large group of churches. So can you tell us something good you've seen, or a couple good things that you've seen come out amongst your fellow missionaries as a result of church connections?
Yeah, absolutely. I just love the creativity behind some of these stories I've heard and experienced myself. I can think of a couple we have working in Portugal that before the pandemic, they had connected with a church during their stateside assignment and even spoken there. And then the pandemic hit and they were stranded and they couldn't really go visit that church. They really sort of lost contact. But lo and behold, that same church ends up on their portfolio of churches, and we do church connections, right? So the very first chance they got, they contacted that church again. And they found out that over the intervening couple of years, their Sunday school, the children had their face up on a board, right? And they were making little construction paper I'm praying for you. Thank you for being a missionary. And over these 2 years, they collected all those construction paper projects and had wanted to give it to these missionaries. And when they finally showed up again as a part of, visiting them as one of their churches they need to connect with, they presented them with this box of construction proof that the church had been praying for them through the whole ordeal, right? And that they were committed to continue praying. It's our relationship with churches is not merely transactional. Okay? It's relational. It's two-way. They pray for us, and we pray for them, and we're excited to see each other. I look forward to communicating with my churches. Another great story I heard that I think wins the prize for the most creative I've heard is there was a lady coming through our stateside conference when we train people when they come back from the field from a little bit. And she's a stay-at-home mom. She's homeschooling her kids. And she's thinking, how can I connect with these churches? What can I do? And she's in Wales, okay? She's in the United Kingdom. I mean, I'm out there, tea time is a thing, right? It's you schedule your day around tea time. So she picked out some of the best tea her region had to offer, what everybody's drinking over there. And she sent them in little envelopes to her churches and invited them to join her in a tea time, like a virtual tea time. Now, one of the churches she got on her list there, the WMU picked up on that, said, that's an awesome idea. Let's do that. Let's take the tea she sent us. Let's have tea time. And let's get her on a screen and conference her in. So they had a virtual tea time while she's at home with her kids. They're having tea and crumpets or whatever goes along with tea. I don't know. But she got to share with them what's a day in the life of a missionary like, right? And they got to really connect. And I just love that. It brought tears to my eyes when I heard that story.
I love both of those stories, because one of the struggles we face as an organization is explaining to our audience what missionaries do in 2023 and beyond, because the mental picture of what it means to be a missionary is usually not fully formed. They just don't have a mental picture of what our people do. So these connection efforts are a way for them to just hear from our people and to listen and go, oh my gosh, I have people like that in my congregation that could do that. And so Jennifer, as you're part of this team that is tasked with reaching the churches, every one of our affinities has an affinity stateside associate, and they're helping their people connect to the local churches. It's not easy. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing in doing this?
I think, let's see, how could you help? One of the biggest challenges we hear from our field personnel is that they write, they call, they email, and they don't hear a response. So one of the things that they tell us is, if you have a chance, you get an email, you get a letter in the mail, write them back. Say thank you. Something that just lets them know they're not writing to the ethers and it's lost. And so that's a big encouragement, because there are so many missionaries that are encouraged each time they hear from the churches. I know people that are on stateside, they were so surprised how responsive the churches are and how welcoming they are. And as Jeff was at a convention meeting, some of them even say mission hungry. They are missionary hungry. And you know what? That encourages our missionaries when they come home, really tired, really unsure, kind of not sure what to come back to. And they're encouraged through the churches that welcome them, through the church connections that they have. So if you get a chance, please write back. If you do not know if you've been contacted by a missionary, go to our booth, and we have a little place where you can scan a QR code. We can make sure we have the up-to-date information on you. And in a short time, we will make sure that there's a missionary that contacts you. Because like Jeff said, it's about the relationships and it's about the connections. And we want to connect you, and they want to connect with you through church connections.
And for our audience that's watching remotely, those that are live streaming it, those that are going to watch one of the recordings. You can also email info@imb.org, and they will connect you with the right people to find out if your church currently has one of our missionaries assigned, and then we can make sure that that person gets a hold of you. It's kind of sad. We laughed about it at first, but it really was a sad fact when some churches were so surprised that the IMB was contacting them that they called in and said, "Hey, we've got these people pretending to be IMB missionaries, and they've reached out to us, and we don't know what their angle is." That's not how we want to be known. And now I think 2 years into this really big push for us, we're hearing great stories. And I know the Moby team works a lot with churches. So, Chris, this question's for you. What are we hearing from the churches who have had these positive encounters, and what does it catalyze? Like, this is often just the first domino that falls in a chain reaction of events that gets them to partner with us. Tell us a little bit more about what you're hearing from churches.
Absolutely. The whole point of Church Connections is getting those relationships started, right? But our hope is that it doesn't end there, too. What we've started to see with a few of the churches where connection has been met is now we're looking at chances for partnership in that local area where the missionary is working. So when missionaries are coming back on their stateside assignment, what we used to call furlough, a chance to be in the States, they're spending a lot of time connecting with their churches that are assigned to them so that they can have those relationships, but they're casting vision to then partner back with their specific body of work or their team's work in that particular city or region. And so now we're seeing churches that are starting to get involved in planning their first trips, all from starting this effort just a year and a half ago. That's fantastic because we know that that's just going to spur along more and more involvement from other churches in that area, because once a pastor catches the vision for what God's doing in these places, some of the hardest to reach places on the planet, we know that he and all of his staff are going to begin to then cast that same vision to the other churches that are in that area. Come, join us and be a part of this. So that kind of rallying cry for partnership has been the next bold step. It's been really exciting to see churches say that. I had a church recently that came to the office, and they had just met for the first time their missionary was assigned to them as a part of Church Connections. And after spending some time with us in the office and meeting, I kid you not, what we heard as that person was leaving the building in Richmond, they said to us, "I have got to give more to the cooperative program." It sounds cheesy being on the stage. It was accurate because they caught a vision for how important that these mechanisms are to sustaining important work overseas. And relationship is a huge part of the glue that makes that work. So, just that, the excitement, the passion, but then also the activity of missional involvement all grows from this.
Human nature can often be cynical, and they think we have an ask when we're connecting with churches. And so for Jeff and Jennifer, what are the things we're telling our missionaries to do when they connect with a church? Like, what's the number one thing we want them to do with a church?
Well, one of the expectations we communicate is we want our missionaries praying for their churches. It's a two-way relationship. We want that, first of all. And we really want just a reach out, like, we ask them to ask their churches, what are you doing locally to reach people for Christ? How can we be praying for you? And do you have anything planned in the future internationally that maybe we can help with? So what we want is a mindset of one body, one mission. We're doing this together. We're reaching the world for Christ. That begins in your Jerusalem, your Judea, your Samaria, the outermost parts of the world, right? And we're all doing our part, and we want to do it together. So I really think that we can summarize what we're asking our people to do is it's together. It's inviting churches to join us in the task of reaching the lost for Christ. There are no lone rangers in that effort, and so I really think it's a coming back to our roots, isn't it? Right? It's a Southern Baptist reaching the world together for Christ.
And we also ask them that at least quarterly they write, contact, visit when they're in the States, their churches. Because as we know in a relationship, it's not one way. It's a rhythm. And so our people are getting into the rhythm of being in conversation with the churches back home.
I think it's a beautiful expression of what we're even seeing on a cooperative program stage, to have the freedom to simply have our missionaries develop relationships without an ask in them. I mean, we hear it from others all the time, the difference that makes in their lives to just have that connection. There's no ask. There's nothing that's, we want to see the cooperative program shine as a result. We want churches to go, wow, this is why we're better together, because we have people like this out in the field. Now, John, you were going to say something.
In the middle of this, it just reminded me, last year I was at this same convention. This guy comes, grabs me, taps me on the shoulder and said, I got to tell you about this. One of your places, talking about one of our missionaries, had gotten connected with these people, and they had started praying and connected up, and they decided to take a mission trip. So they got there, and this missionary had them out doing some work and all of that, and nobody could speak to these persons, but they could tell that this one guy that they were talking to said something Christian. So they went and they got that missionary. He was over on another place. They brought him back. He explained the gospel to him. The guy prayed to receive Christ, and they were going, we got to be involved in finding that person, bringing that person, and our missionary closed the deal for us there right in that moment. And they were just like, wow, we're part of the mission team. And that is really what it's all about, for us to be together, impacting lostness, changing eternity from perishing to life eternal all over the planet.
So I was going to ask you, why are you so passionate about the Church Connections effort? And your passion just shined through. But it is a big lift on GE. This is asking a lot of our missionaries. And you've been on board with it from when it was just a thought or an idea. Why is it important for our globalization efforts?
Well, if we're going to really be able to touch the entire planet, if we're going to be able to get to all of these people, we need praying Southern Baptists. For years, we've known the secret of the power that God brings to us is when we come together praying for this. And used to be, we had it organized where they pray for you on your birthday, and people would go do witness on that day because people were praying for them, and they would see God move in amazing ways because it's us together impacting lostness. For some reason, God delights in his people working together to bring the good news to a dying world. And that good news is life eternal.
I was actually going to ask you, and you beat me to it there, that I'd heard a rumor that sometimes on the field people would save their challenging things that they had to do. What role, I just want to unpack this since we have, many people have served overseas on stage. What role does prayer play in what we do? We don't often talk about it publicly, but what role does prayer play for our missionaries across the globe?
I'll start out. I'm sure you have great examples, but when we pray and we're praying together, we're praying across the place, you see impossible things happen. Just 3 weeks ago, I got an email from a missionary who is working on the field in as tough a place as possible. And we'd been praying with this person, and they went and they sat down, and they didn't expect that they were going to have a great breakthrough. But in just every question, they working with the person said, that makes sense to me. 2 weeks before, it didn't. And the only explanation is people were praying. God was working. His Spirit was convicting. He was doing what we can't do. He was preparing a person to receive life eternal.
Right. Another story comes to mind for me of prayer. It's one day on the field, I was discouraged, and I was working in a place with some hard soil, if you know what I mean. And I was saying, Lord, I need an encouragement. Show me that there's something happening here. And so that Sunday, I was called to preach up in a town up in the north, and I gave a talk on personal evangelism. I gave tools, and I encouraged people to do personal evangelism. And I thought, well, I hope that moves the needle somehow, right? Well, later that night, I came back to preach the Sunday night, and one of the ladies from the congregation excitedly ran up to me, and she said, I want you to know, I listened to what you said this morning. I really felt God moving me to take what you said and put into action. This afternoon, I had neighbors that I've been wanting to share the gospel with, but I'd been afraid to. But today, I went and shared with them. It was the best thing I've ever done. And I'm so excited. Thanks for sharing that this morning. And I really felt like that was the Lord telling me, yes, I am working here. Yes, things are happening. And whenever I pray, a coincidence like that happens. You know?
Coincidence.
Yeah.
And also another story I have is that we challenge our people to pray for the churches that they are. And one of the fun stories we have is everyone has a mug around and popsicle sticks, but they want to encourage their kids on how to pray because they tell them if it wasn't for the efforts of the churches that sent them, they would not be here serving. And so the kids wrote each church that they have in their portfolio on the popsicle sticks, and they pull out every morning at breakfast and they pray for that church. This church that some of the kids, they may have never visited yet, but we realized that if it wasn't for the churches, that we have to pray for them because there's darkness and there's lostness around the world. And so with their help, we want to pray for them as much as they pray for us. And I just love it when we get the whole family involved in prayer because there is power. Our kids are not too young to learn to pray. They're on the field with us, and we are so thankful for the churches for praying for us and the protection. But we like to encourage our kids to be praying for you guys at the church in America.
Well, a couple things as we wrap up our time together this afternoon. Our Church Connections program, it's relatively new and it's still gaining traction. And again, for our audience, you've heard that our missionaries are making an effort to contact all of our SBC churches. If you have not responded, you haven't known, is this legit? Is this real? It is. And so please respond to your missionaries because they want to bring the same energy that you've experienced with us this afternoon to your church. They want to talk about what God's doing. They want to talk about prayer. They want to talk about relationships. They want to talk about connecting. What they don't want to talk about is funding because we have the cooperative program in Lottie Moon, and we know that churches that are engaged get even more passionate for this. So I'm excited for what this means as more and more of our people who have really been remote. We've sent them, and sometimes it's 6, 7, 8 years before they ever even come back to the U.S. And now they're getting to connect with churches. This week at our booth, you're going to have an opportunity, if you're here, to scan a QR code. Again, we're going to mention the QR code. If you're not at the booth, you can email info@imb.org, and they will connect you with the right people. And you've heard us echo this multiple times, but at the IMB, we believe the world's greatest problem is lostness. We're not going to be changing our messaging on that because this is not a problem that's shrinking. It's a problem that's growing every single day. But we know there's a solution. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And for Southern Baptists, there is a way to get the gospel to the lost across the globe. And it's through your International Mission Board. And we're grateful to Cooperative Program for sponsoring this time and for allowing us to come here and talk to each of you. And I thank our guests for being up here and sharing a little bit from their hearts about what makes this work. Thank you very much.